Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're undertaking a really deep, absolutely uncompromising dive into a molecule that has quietly, almost invisibly, conquered the globe. Now, I need you to set aside whatever you think you know about tobacco, because we aren't just talking about a simple plant extract today, not at all. What we are really talking about is engineered chemistry. We are looking at the deliberate, calculated weaponization of nicotine. If you think you understand how this chemical works, well, prepare to have your perspective entirely shifted. Let's dive right in.
So, what makes a habit as hard to kick as heroin? It's a stark, almost uncomfortable question, isn't it? I mean, we see nicotine products every single day. You see them at the grocery store checkout, stacked up behind the counter at the gas station, in the hands of people just casually walking down the street. It is entirely ubiquitous. It's deeply, deeply normalized in our society. But here's the thing. From a biological, a chemical, and a neurological standpoint, the underlying mechanism that keeps someone coming back to that corner store day after day is far darker and, frankly, far more powerful than we culturally like to acknowledge.
And look, this isn't just hyperbole. I'm not just trying to be dramatic here. This is a clinical fact. The New York Times Magazine actually published this exact finding, noting that scientists have found nicotine is similar in all critical measures to prototypical drugs of abuse. We're talking about substances like cocaine, morphine, and yes, heroin. To put that into perspective, consider what nicotine actually is in the natural world. It's actually a poison. It is literally used as an insecticide in agriculture. If you were to take it in large enough doses, it can quite literally paralyze your breathing muscles. There's no coming back from that. But when it's delivered in precise, highly controlled microdoses, it completely hijacks the central nervous system. So the real mystery we need to unravel today is how exactly did a toxic plant insecticide become one of the most widely consumed, legally engineered substances on the face of the planet?
Section 1. Tobacco on the battlefield. Okay, to truly understand the sheer, massive scale of global addiction today, we actually have to transition away from the modern, sterile laboratory for a minute. We need to step back in time, directly into the grim, high-stress, terrifying reality of World War II. During this massive global conflict, armies were largely made up of citizen conscripts. These were just ordinary, everyday young men who were suddenly thrust into unimaginable terror. Now, remember what we said about nicotine's effects on the body? It produces what scientists call a biphasic physiological effect. That's a fancy way of saying it does two completely different things back to back. When it first hits your bloodstream, it acts as a harsh toxin, violently constricting your blood vessels. But then, in the very next instant, those vessels relax. They open up, lowering your blood pressure and your pulse, and providing this powerful, sweeping, tranquilizing wave of relief. Imagine you're a shell-shocked soldier facing relentless artillery fire. That brief, pseudo-medicinal relaxation wasn't just a habit. For these guys, it was an absolutely vital psychological coping mechanism.
And the military high command? They fully recognized the immense psychological power of this chemical. They knew exactly what it was doing for the men. General Pershing himself famously cabled Washington with a very clear demand. He stated, "You ask me what we need to win this war? I answer tobacco as much as bullets." Think about the weight of that statement. It was viewed as an absolute, undeniable necessity for troop morale. It wasn't just a casual habit anymore. It was literally a currency. It was a bonding mechanism among the men. It was a fleeting, 5-minute escape from the pervasive, agonizing boredom and the sheer, mind-numbing terror of the trenches. Sharing a smoke became an incredibly powerful, deeply patriotic act of mutual survival.
In fact, the integration of this chemical into military life was so absolute, so complete, that cigarettes were built directly into a soldier's basic survival kit. Right there in a standard-issue dinner K-ration, sitting right alongside the nutritional biscuits and the canned meat, sat a neat little pack of Chesterfield cigarettes. Think about the logistics of that for a second. The authorities literally prioritized packing cigarettes into a soldier's daily food rations before they even thought to include toilet paper. It's wild to think about, but the military apparatus itself effectively became the ultimate government-sponsored distribution network for a highly addictive chemical.
12. Let that number sink in. That is the exact number of cigarettes that were issued to soldiers every single day for free inside their K-rations. That breaks down to 4 cigarettes per meal: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And hey, if that daily allotment wasn't enough to get you through the artillery barrages, you could always buy heavily discounted 20-packs at the Army Post Exchange. The result of this massive distribution system, by the time these citizen soldiers finally returned home from the war, an entire generation of men had been completely, physiologically rewired. The global addiction was permanently cemented. But as the decades passed, the tobacco industry started to realize a major flaw in their business model. Relying on a natural, unpredictable plant was risky,
Crops vary, the chemical levels vary. To guarantee their future, they needed absolute molecular control over the product.
Section 2. Engineering the freebase.
So now, we're moving out of the muddy, bloody trenches of wartime stress relief, and we're entering the sterile, highly calculated, and honestly quite chilling world of corporate chemistry. When you dig into the internal tobacco industry documents from this era, you see a terrifying shift in strategy. It's all laid out right there in black and white. In 1962, a scientific advisor for British American Tobacco wrote a memo stating, "What we need to know above all things is what constitutes the hold of smoking. That is, to understand addiction." They weren't hiding it internally. Then moved to 1964. The executives realized that the true driver of this addiction was dictated by the speed of transfer of that nicotine from the smoke to the bloodstream. Speed was the key. And by 1980, they literally had entire task forces dedicated entirely to finding what they called the threshold dose. That's the exact minimum level of nicotine required to keep a user physiologically hooked so they simply couldn't quit. They weren't just agricultural farmers selling dried leaves anymore. They were brilliant, ruthless chemists engineering a highly sophisticated drug delivery device.
The absolute most crucial point here is exactly how they achieved that rapid speed of transfer they were so desperate for. The answer? Chemistry. Specifically, they used ammonia. You see, naturally occurring nicotine in a tobacco leaf exists largely as a salt. Now, a salt is very stable, but it's incredibly slow to absorb into the human body. It's clunky. But industry scientists discovered something revolutionary. They found that by washing the tobacco in ammonia, they could literally strip the protons away from the nicotine molecule, artificially increasing its pH level. This completely changes the state of the chemical, returning the nicotine to a deprotonated, pure state known as free base. Why does this matter? Because free base nicotine is an uncharged molecule, and an uncharged molecule is like a ghost. It crosses biological membranes from your lungs to your blood with absolutely zero resistance. They didn't have to pack more actual nicotine into the cigarette. They just used chemistry to make the nicotine they already had infinitely more potent and violently, terrifyingly fast.
Section 3. Hijacking the human brain.
So I keep using the word fast, but just how fast is violently fast? To truly comprehend the sheer biological trauma that a free-base cigarette inflicts on the human body, we have to look inside the skull at a pharmacological concept known as the rate of rise. Rate of rise simply defines the speed at which a drug's concentration dramatically increases in brain tissue. And here is the real kicker. What neuroscientists have discovered is that the speed of a drug's delivery is just as critical, if not significantly more critical, than the actual peak amount of the drug you take. A slow, gentle trickle of a drug into your system over a few hours might barely register. It might do nothing at all. But a massive, instantaneous, rapid spike, that sudden shock to the system violently triggers intense euphorogenic effects. It literally forces the brain to aggressively adapt to protect itself, rapidly creating deep tolerance and sensitization. The tobacco industry chemists knew this intuitively decades ago, but it wasn't until modern PET scans came along that we could finally prove it visually.
13 seconds. 13 seconds. In a truly groundbreaking, eye-opening clinical study, scientists used positron emission tomography, those are PET scans, to physically track this process in real time. They tagged freebase nicotine with a radioactive carbon isotope just so they could watch it travel through the bodies of living, breathing smokers. And the results were staggering. After a single typical puff of a cigarette, that freebase nicotine crossed the lungs, entered the oxygenated arterial blood, completely bypassed the body's protective blood-brain barrier, and reached 50% of its maximum peak concentration in the human brain in just 13 seconds. That is not a gradual, natural absorption process. That is a full-blown neurological ambush.
Let's really break down what this 13-second chemical reaction actually does to the human body, because it is staggering. First of all, 13 seconds is actually faster, and it produces a much sharper, more aggressive spike in your brain than if you were to inject nicotine directly into your vein with an IV needle. Just let that sink in. Smoking it is faster than injecting it. Second, this extreme unnatural speed produces an intensely powerful hedonic, or euphoric rush, that the brain immediately craves again. Third, and honestly this is the most terrifying part to me, this rapid strike triggers what is known as immediate early gene expression. That means the sheer speed of this engineered drug literally sends a signal to your brain's genes to start rewiring its own cellular pathways. It is actively altering your brain's physical plasticity just to ensure you crave more of it. And finally, this constant rewiring drives psychomotor sensitization, meaning your body reacts more intensely to the drug over time, not less. The human brain, evolved over millions of years, simply doesn't stand a chance against a 13-second engineered delivery system.
Section 4. The nicotine salt evolution.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, the 13-second free-base cigarette has to be the absolute pinnacle of chemical engineering, right? How could you possibly beat that? Well, the modern vaping industry didn't just beat it, they entirely rewrote the rules of chemistry to perfect this delivery mechanism. It all starts with a very specific biological paradox regarding freebase nicotine. You see, freebase nicotine, the stuff used in standard Marlboros and those early clunky vape pens, has a very high pH level. That high pH is exactly what makes it incredibly fast, but it also makes it incredibly alkaline and harsh on the human throat. The throat hit you get from trying to inhale high doses of freebase nicotine is severe. It burns, and this harshness actually acted as a natural biological speed limit. You simply couldn't inhale massive, overwhelming amounts of it without violently coughing in pain. Your body was warning you. But modern vape scientists, they found a brilliant, terrifying way to completely bypass this biological alarm system. And they did it by reverting back to the original form, nicotine salts.
But hold on, remember what we talked about earlier? Natural nicotine salts are stable, but they don't absorb well. They're too slow to cause that 13-second addiction spike. So to fix this, the modern engineers introduced a brand new chemical catalyst into the mix, benzoic acid. By purposefully adding this naturally occurring acid to the slow nicotine salt, three almost magical things happen simultaneously. First, the acid completely neutralizes the alkalinity, dramatically lowering the pH and totally smoothing out the harshness. The burning sensation is gone. Second, it alters the physical properties of the liquid, allowing it to vaporize at much lower temperatures, making it incredibly easy to inhale. And third, and most importantly, it fundamentally alters the chemical structure in the vapor so that it absorbs into the human bloodstream just as violently fast as the combustible freebase nicotine did. Think about what they accomplished here. They took the terrifying 13-second neurological hit of a traditional cigarette and they completely, 100% removed the body's natural pain barrier. You can now inhale massive, unprecedented, superphysiological doses of nicotine with absolute flawless smoothness. Your body doesn't even know it's being poisoned until the brain is already rewired.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today, and it leaves us with this final, truly lingering thought. We've traced this single molecule all the way from the muddy, terrifying battlefields of Europe, where it was essentially a desperate government-issued tool for psychological survival, all the way to the sleek, high-tech corporate laboratories of today. In those labs, this chemical has been systematically stripped down, freebased, acid-washed, and perfectly optimized to hijack human gene expression in exactly 13 seconds, without leaving even a single scratch on the back of your throat. The delivery system is, for all intents and purposes, scientifically flawless. So I leave you to ponder this as we wrap up. If this is what the absolute perfection of chemical dependency looks like today, what on earth does the next evolution of addiction look like? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive in today's Explainer. I hope it shifted your perspective. Keep learning, keep questioning, and above all, stay focused.